Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to another edition of Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and we are coming to you again from our studio on Coastal Alabama's campus, and we appreciate these guys in Fairhope opening the space up to us. It's been a nice change as we recorded in Bruton for the last couple of weeks, and so we're back home now, and so we appreciate those guys for allowing us to come and record once again. Our guest today is Dr. Katrina Skinner, and she is a pediatrician with Fairhope Pediatrics. So, Dr. Skinner, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me today.
So talk about leadership in just a minute, of course, but start by telling me a little bit about your background, how you came about deciding to go into medicine, and then how you ended up at Fairhope Pediatrics.
Sure, I can do that. So I am a Fairhope native, born and raised here. My family originally moved here in the 50s, and I don't remember ever not wanting to be a physician or a pediatrician. The first I remember deciding I wanted to be a pediatrician was the fourth grade on the playground, and somebody asked me, and that's what I said. And I just remember as a kid, I liked my pediatrician, and she happens to still be in practice here in town, so I get to practice alongside of her. But that was the first time I remember acknowledging that I wanted to be a pediatrician, and I did entertain some other ideas along the way, high school and college, and even medical school, but never really strayed too far from that. And so, I went through the whole process, med school, residency, and then when it came time to go into practice, I knew I wanted to come back to my hometown. There was never any question about that. And so I started looking for a job, and there was one pediatric practice in town, and I always thought I would go to work for them, and they just didn't have room for me at the time. They were at capacity, and so never being one to take no for an answer, I said, okay, well, what's my other option? I guess I have to start a practice. And so I started looking with the help of some very savvy advisors and consultants, one of whom you guys may know because it was Earl Blackman.
Oh, yeah.
And I started looking at real estate and really couldn't find a suitable space. And so I decided to build an office. So while I was in my third year of residency, built an office. So 6 weeks after I graduated residency, we started seeing patients.
Oh, wow.
And I look back on that time in my life, and I feel like I might have been a little bit insane. Not sure how I did that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was coming home from work at the hospital in Pensacola after dark to come check on my office and trying to see what had been done, after the sun had gone down. But it all worked out. And, you know, we're 12 years in now and things are going great.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you probably didn't know any better at the time, right?
That was
this is a little bit too crazy. Right.
That was the direction I needed to go.
Yeah. So have you always had that? I mean, do you consider yourself an entrepreneur? Obviously, you've got that bent towards you because you've got your own business. You started off working for yourself and forming this practice. So has that always been something that you've considered yourself to have that bent towards you?
For sure. I think a lot of physicians, not just pediatricians, but a lot of physicians are scared of the business side of medicine, or they think it's dirty or bad. They don't want anything to do with it. But I've always enjoyed the business side of my practice, looking at how, the number side of things works. How can we do things more efficiently? How can we be more productive? And fortunately, in pediatrics, our National Academy provides some really good resources for us. There's a very large group of pediatricians within our academy that support one another from a practice management aspect. So fortunately, I got plugged in with them from the very beginning, and that's helped me grow my practice to be as successful as it is. I think without that support, I would not have gotten to where I am today.
Yeah. Well, I've heard, and I don't know if this is a relatively new thing or maybe it's been around for a while, but I think some colleges, medical schools offer maybe a dual program where you come out with your MD and MBA. Is that right? Is that kind of a new thing, or is that something that's been going on for a while?
I don't know the exact history of it. I know my school did offer that, and I kick myself all the time for not taking advantage. It was looking back, very good deal. I remember there being in the fourth year some simple classes, and you had an MBA, and I'm sure it was a bargain compared to what it would cost me now to go back and do it.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea is just what you said, because a lot of times you come out knowing full well how to enter your chosen profession, specialty, and that kind of thing. But then a lot of doctors do come out and open their own practice, but it's like, they don't really have a clue on the business side of things. And so I think that fills a void that's, is probably out there. for sure. So we'll talk about leadership. What do you consider when I say leadership? What is your definition? And can you give me some comments on what you kind of think your leadership style might be as you've formulated and gone through Fairhope Pediatrics?
That's a big question. I guess I would define a leader as, someone who is, setting an example and paving the way for the people around them, the people who look up to them, whether they're people on their team or people in their community, the people that they interact with. And then what was the second part of your question?
Your leadership style.
My leadership style. Okay. Well, I guess it's kind of evolved over time. I guess that's normal.
Yeah.
I've had to learn over time that I think as physicians, we have a tendency to be a little bit type A. We're kind of control freaks, and that is a good thing when you're a physician, because you want your doctor to make sure that all the boxes are checked and every last thing is looked after. But it can also be to our detriment sometimes, because if you're trying to be in control of every single thing, at some point you're going to reach a point where there's too much for you to do, and you're going to start to fall behind, especially if you're trying to run a business and manage patients. So I think it becomes very important as a leader to be able to also delegate. And I think an effective leader is one who is also a good delegator. And when you start to delegate, you have to realize that if you're going to delegate a task, you need to be able to explain that task effectively. You need to be able to communicate what you want done. And then once you've done that, if your team member does the task, they fulfill what you have communicated to them, then you need to be willing to accept their interpretation of what they've done for you, and then give them constructive feedback, not go back and redo it for them. And I think as control freak doctors, sometimes we tend to want to do that. And so that's one of the things that I've had to teach myself over the years. Yeah.
Now, those are good points. And so inherent in what you're talking about, in order to delegate, you've got to have a team that you trust, right? I mean, you've got to have people that you can pass that stuff down to. So when you're looking at your team at Fairhope Pediatrics, give me what makes a good team member in your estimation. What do you look for when you're hiring someone to come alongside you and work in a practice you built from scratch? So I know that it's very important to have the right team in place.
Sure. I mean, anybody is going to want their team members to agree with and support their mission and vision. So you first need to be able to define that so that you can relay that to your team members or your potential team members so that you can be working toward the same goal. For me, I want my team members to be willing to make changes. I like to make a lot of changes. We're constantly trying to do things differently and better. So they need to be willing to change and go with the punches. They also need to be willing to formulate ideas and plans on their own. They know not to just come to me with a problem. You better come to me with a problem that already you've come up with a solution, or at least an idea on a way to solve it. Yeah. So that's what I look for. Yeah,
great. Well, and so the last thing that we've not touched on from your show primer is leading in crisis and change. And I'm not sure if COVID really was at the top of mind when you put that down, but I mean, obviously COVID is a thing now that you're having to deal with, and especially being in the healthcare sector. What has that looked like? I mean, how has COVID affected what you do? How have you kind of rallied the troops? I mean, if you've been down staff because they've been out either with the virus themselves or caring for family members, what does that look like in your practice as far as dealing with this very, very real health crisis that we're going through?
Yes, there are times, when as a leader, it's okay for you to say, okay, I'm going to take the time to hear what my team has to say. We're going to formulate a plan together. Maybe we'll try this or try that. And then there are times when, as a leader, you just have to get out there and make a clear statement in front of your team and show them the way. And I think that when the pandemic started, that was a time that a leader had to do that, because our teams were scared. They were uncertain. They didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, next month, next week, the next minute. And so that was a time where it wasn't an opportunity for us to brainstorm or have, meetings where we discuss ideas. That was when the leader needed to step forward and let the staff know, I've got this. I am here for you. I am going to take care of you. I'm going to do what needs to be done to keep this ship afloat. And so I think that, to me, that was one of the things that got us through in those beginning phases when we were having to make so many changes, is giving your staff that reassurance and that confidence.
Well, and we were talking off air before we started recording that you, as well as seeing your pediatric patients, you're a spot where people can come get the vaccination, right? And so that's a whole other level of, I guess, logistics that you have to work into your already, I'm sure, busy schedule seeing your regular patients. So how has that evolved, and how has that kind of impacted the other areas of your practice and having to kind of integrate this new thing into what you do on a daily basis?
Sure. So, a lot of people in the beginning, when pediatricians were volunteering to give COVID vaccinations, a lot of people in the public health sector or in adult medicine were kind of skeptical because they thought, why do pediatricians want to give the vaccines? The vaccines aren't available for children, and people didn't really get it. But I think we finally got our point across. It's who gives the most vaccinations every year. Right. Who has the equipment to store them, who knows about inventorying, who knows how to counsel patients on vaccines. I mean, that's the pediatrician. My office gave over 10,000 vaccines last year. Yeah. And yes, I know my adult colleagues do give some vaccines, but I'm pretty sure they didn't give 10,000 vaccines for an equally sized office. And right now, a lot of pediatric practices are seeing a significant reduction in patient visits. I spoke to a national consultant earlier today, and across the country, they're seeing 30 to 40% reduction in patient volumes just because of, parents being scared to take their kids in or, fewer sicknesses just because of the social distancing. Yeah. So pediatricians have time on their hands right now, and they could be a great resource to public health to get these vaccines out. So we volunteered. Public health finally wrapped their head around the idea of pediatricians giving shots to the elderly, and we got some vaccines in our office. And the response has been phenomenal. We have definitely way more demand than we can meet. We pivoted quickly to create an online scheduling website or page on our website. And, the fact that we've been compared to Chick-fil-A a couple of times, to me, that's like the best praise ever. I feel like we have succeeded. We are continuing to tweak the process. Yeah. But I just felt like, this is our opportunity to help turn the tide on this pandemic. We have the skills and the resources to provide this service, and we need to do it. And on top of that, this is something that has rejuvenated my staff. I mean, letting them do something that is giving back to the community where they feel like they are making a difference. So many people have shared, their appreciation and their gratitude to my staff. And I think that has helped give them back energy that has been drained over the past year.
Yeah, that's all good stuff, and obviously filling a huge need in the community along the way. So that's great. I appreciate that. All right, let's move on. So I asked you to list a couple of qualities that you think are inherent in a good leader, or that someone needs to be a good leader. And you mentioned several, and I'll just read through those. And if you want to land on one or two specifically, that's fine. But you said self-starting, focused, motivated, and advocate. Expand on one or two of those if you don't mind.
Okay, well, I guess we could talk about advocate first, because I feel like I was just hitting on that, with the... Well,
and that's the one that I don't think that has really been mentioned before, so I was hoping that you would expand, you would mention that one. So
with the COVID vaccine, if the pediatricians in the state, and we did this on a statewide level, one of the things we haven't talked about is that I currently serve as the president of the state chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So through that platform, we were able to work together to speak up as a group for pediatricians as vaccinators. And so as pediatricians, we are born advocates because our patients can't speak up for themselves. So it is our job as their representative to speak up for them. So pediatricians are very familiar with advocating. But I think as leaders in general, we have to advocate as well. And I credit my grandmother for kind of seeding me with this advocacy bug when I was little. And she may not recognize this, but she used to say to me when I was little, "You have not because you ask not." And she was usually saying that because she wanted me to eat more. Well, you didn't ask for it, so you don't have it. But I kind of turned that around, and now I use it to encourage people. You're not going to get something if you don't ask for it. So, if you want your insurance company to pay you for a service that you're providing, they're not going to pay you unless you ask them to pay you. If you just keep doing it without bringing attention to the fact that you're providing this service, why would they pay you? Or if you want the government to do something different, if you need to go after that legislator and you need to tell them, this is a service that I'm providing, or this is a problem that I see. Kids are not getting this. You need to go after them and tell them. So many times I have seen where because someone asked, because a pediatrician asked, because we went to Capitol Hill or we went to an insurance company and we made the problem known, we asked for what we wanted, we were told yes. But if we hadn't asked, it never would have happened. So that's, I think as a leader, you have to be willing to advocate because the people that you represent, the people on your team, they may not know how, or they may not, have the ability to do that advocacy for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. And obviously advocating for others, but I think you also mentioned, self-advocacy too, right? And I think
For
that's
sure.
the thing that some people miss sometimes, that they get so caught up in advocating for others, which is fine. But at
Right.
some point you have to self-advocate too,
For sure. And at the beginning of the pandemic, pediatricians definitely had to do that because just like so many other businesses, our business was threatened because patient volumes were down so low. And so one of the things that we did as the Academy of Pediatrics was go to the insurers and say, we need you to pay for these certain things, services that they had not previously covered. So for instance, telemedicine, Medicaid of Alabama was not covering telemedicine visits. Fortunately, with our advocacy, we were quickly able to get them to turn that to where we could get paid. And so that was one of the things that helped us sustain our business by getting that covered.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you mentioned grandmother, so let me ask you about mom and dad, because you specifically mentioned them when we asked you to give us an influencer or two in your life. And so mom and dad's a common answer, but what about your mother and father has impacted you?
Sure. So, I guess everybody tries to see what characteristics they have of each parent. And my dad is an entrepreneur. He, had always owned his own business. And I definitely see that trait in me, just the desire to be independent, to run my own business. Aside from my practice, I have a few other things that I am involved in outside of direct patient care. And then my mother, though, she was always more of the kind of steady grounding rod, kind of calm and organized, kind of kept things running. And so I'm thankful that I have that aspect to kind of balance things out. But yeah, I think that both of my parents contributed to me turning out the way that I did.
Yeah. Well, one of the words you used to describe your mom was rational, and I thought that was a great word because, sometimes we all get in situations where we're not always rational, even though we think we're trying to do the right thing, we're not always thinking clearly. So I think the fact that you pointed out that specific quality in her goes to her level-headedness, it sounds like. Yeah. You wrote some things down that I loved all these. So I just want to run through what you said. We ask you for some things that you might want to focus on as far as leadership concepts. So I'll run through these and we can kind of circle back some. But don't take no for an answer is one. There's nothing that you can't do is another one. This is the one that I really like. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it, right? And then each year do more of what you love and less of what you don't. I think all those things are great. Let me land on the one, though, that I really like. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. Why? I mean, what's your thought process there?
Yeah, so that's one that I've kind of evolved with over time, and that's kind of been one of the mantras I've been preaching to other pediatricians as I've had the opportunity. But basically, we can't do everything. And just because, yes, we have the skills to do it doesn't mean we're the right person for the job. And so one of the other things, I don't know if I wrote it on there, but one of the things that I say to my colleagues is that the pediatrician should only do what only the pediatrician can do. Mm-hmm. We have a very highly specialized skill set. No one else in our office can do the things that we can do. Yeah. And so we shouldn't be doing jobs that other people can do for us. And so that's why I say that, and I tell my other staff that too, my office manager. I don't want her doing a clerical job that she could have someone else on staff do because her time is more valuable than that. So basically, it gets back to the whole idea of delegation, like we talked about earlier. Yeah, right.
And then talk about, and I really like this a lot. Each year, do more of what you love and less of what you don't.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing more of this year, and what are you trying to cut out? Because I think I asked the question back when the pandemic first. It seems like 15 years ago now, but anyway, a year ago when the pandemic first started and we were doing these episodes, what's something you've been forced to cut out of your life that you're not going to bring back, and then what's something that you've started doing that you had not been doing before? So kind of along the same lines, but talk about things that you love that you're going to do more of and things that you don't that you're not.
Yeah. So this was a piece of advice that I got from a very experienced pediatrician when I was first in practice. And I went to him and I was kind of feeling frazzled. I didn't know what to do. And he said, look, it's simple. Every year, just do more of what you like and less of what you don't. And I was like, that just solves everything. And so, I've managed to refine my practice over the years with that advice, and kind of streamlining the services that we do in our office. And so, I don't know, this year specifically, I don't know. I think, what I'm working on now is just refining how we're operating the office to make sure that everybody in the office is enjoying their job, that we're providing the best experience possible for our patients. I'm working on refining our physical presence as well as our online presence. So we've got some things that we're working on. As far as what am I doing less of? I don't know, I guess less of the, it's always, I want to do less of the menial stuff, that I don't need to be spending my time doing.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned telemedicine. I just want to circle back to that real quick. I'm just curious, how has not only telemedicine but technology in general changed kind of the way that you guys provide your services and the way that patients receive those? Has it had a huge impact as far as the ability to have that personal interaction, one-on-one type things that, that a lot of doctors really like as far as the actually seeing the patients? What does that look like with technology and
Well, I think telemedicine is definitely here to stay. I think any physician office that hasn't adopted telemedicine better watch out.
Yeah, okay.
And they need to get on board if they haven't already. I think one of the things that stuck with me that we learned in medical school was that, I don't remember the exact number, but 80% of the time you can make a diagnosis before you ever lay hands on the patient. So that means that, most of the time, just by talking to the patient, you can already have your diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So that tells you that telemedicine can work, okay? That can be a viable platform to conduct a visit. I do think some of the time the parent wants the reassurance of me putting my hands on the child, but for me, it's not always going to add that much information for me. Usually I have enough experience now. I know what the diagnosis is going to be before I ever lay my hands on the child. It definitely adds a layer of convenience for a lot of families. They can have a visit with you without leaving home, or if the parent's at work or if they're out of town. That's definitely nice. We're even doing some things, not quite telemedicine, but kind of a hybrid where we're seeing patients in the parking lot, so they never even have to get out of their car. Mm-hmm. That's another convenience service that we've added for parents.
Our industry has been affected a lot by availability of Zoom to meet with clients. So does telemedicine, does that include Zoom meetings, or do you do that in addition to like telephone consultations? What does that term telemedicine mean?
So it really depends on your state and your payer. Okay. And with the pandemic, there were some special loosening of the rules. Mm-hmm. So for right now, under the emergency situation, we can do a simple telephone call in Alabama. With most of our major payers, that is satisfactory. I have a feeling once the emergency is, once we go back to normal, then telephone calls probably will not be covered like they are right now. But, yes, Zoom can work. It's not my first choice. We use a specific telemedicine platform that integrates with our health record. So that's what we do. But, you definitely want to make sure that whatever you're using is a secure platform.
Yeah, got it. So talk about Fairhope Pediatrics and where you guys hope to be maybe in 3 to 5 years. You mentioned vision, I think, earlier on in your conversation. So I know every good leader has a vision for what they want their organization to be. So as you look down the road, what do you see for Fairhope Pediatrics going forward?
Sure. So, I would say my vision is still close to what it was when I first started, and that's to have, a hometown pediatric practice that provides top-notch care where parents and patients feel like they're part of the family. And so I would say that's still my goal. Do I one day want to have another practice somewhere? Maybe. I would love to consider expanding to another location, possibly. I also have a passion to reach out into underserved areas and more rural parts of Alabama. Okay. But, those are just kind of my things that I dream about when I lay in bed at night having a hard time falling asleep.
Understood. Well, let me ask you this. I know that, medical school, my goodness, is full of reading and studying and that kind of thing. So I know you didn't have a whole lot of chance to probably read for pleasure back in the day. But since you're removed from that, do you still read a lot for pleasure, for what's the word I'm looking for, Carrie?
Self-improvement.
Thank you. Yeah, self-improvement. Is that something that you like to do?
I definitely try to.
Okay.
You're right. During medical school and residency, I did not have as much time for that as I wanted. I was an avid reader when I was younger. And so I've been getting myself back into it in recent years.
So have you any good books that you've read lately that you can point out for us?
Let me think. What would I suggest? Probably, let's see, nonfiction. I would say The Deepest Well is a good book that I would recommend for anyone to read. And that is written by a pediatrician. She's currently the Surgeon General of the state of California. Okay. And it's a book that talks about how adverse events that we experience during childhood not only affect us during childhood, but they can also impact our health later in adulthood. So I think that's a fascinating book about that science. But it's written to where lay people can grasp it. Let's see, my good fiction book that I've read recently. A really good one was The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek.
Okay.
I think I have that name correct. That's a really good one too.
Okay. And what about, so if I went to Spotify, iTunes, presets on the radio, what kind of music do you have on heavy rotation?
No one thing in particular, but I don't know. I mean, if I had it on a local radio station, it's probably the Zoo. So anything in that genre.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last question. This has been a while since I've pulled this one out, but I'll bring it out just for you. It has been a while. So if I fired up the old Viso Group time machine and allowed you to go to travel anywhere in time, in the future or back in history, where would you want to go and why?
See, I might answer that differently depending on my mood.
Fair enough.
See, I think the reason I would pick different times, assuming my answer today.
Okay.
I would pick different times just to be able to experience the clothes that they wore. Because I'm fascinated by costume and construction of clothing. We didn't even talk about this, but sewing is one of my hobbies. So I would love to be able to wear some kind of intricate antebellum gown, or even more remote than that, and just see what it felt like to dress in those ways that they did years and years ago. Yeah,
that's a good answer. I've asked that question several times, but that's a unique perspective, which I really like. So, well, I lied. One more question. So sewing is a big one. So what else do you do when you're not, running your business and seeing patients to kind of decompress and
the things that help me stay sane: sewing, knitting, baking bread, bar classes, biking with my husband, well, traveling whenever we don't have a pandemic.
Yeah. Now I've got to ask, bar classes, is that like mixing bar classes, or is that like bar exercise?
Exercise bar, yeah.
That's what I was afraid you were going to say that. I was hoping it was bar classes like mixology. Get some pointers from me. All right, so this is the last question, I promise, but you keep saying things that pique my interest. So travel, where's your first place that you're going to want to get back to whenever kind of travel opens up? Hopefully sooner rather than later, but who knows at this point? I
guess it depends on how exactly we feel about travel. I mean, if it's like we're just going to go somewhere domestic versus we're going to travel halfway around the world. I mean, if we decide to just go on a Caribbean vacation, we'll probably go somewhere like St. Bart's, which is one of our favorites. If we go halfway around the world, we'll probably go to France or maybe Italy.
All those things sound wonderful. Yeah. I'm ready to travel now. So we need to get this pandemic over with so we can all get back on the road again. So Dr. Skinner, thanks so much for coming. If people want to find out more about what you guys do at Fairhope Pediatrics, they can go where? Either fairhopepeds.com or my personal website is katrinaskinner.com. Great. All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Viso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.